Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 181 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeff Winkle. I'm down here in the bunker. This is, I always forget what we call it.
Vomitorium Central.
Vomitorium Central.
You want to verge toward a kind of belly buttonology.
That's right. This is our omphalos.
You want to call it the omphalos.
That's our Parnassus. But,
yeah, Zeus sent some birds around, and they dropped that stone, or they crossed, right?
Right over our bunker.
Right over our bunker.
Yeah. Imagine.
Yeah,
exactly. So we, you got to take that kind of sign seriously.
Okay. All right.
So that's where we do our little podcast. But I am here as always with my good friend and co-host, Dr. David C. Noe. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing really well, actually.
Yes?
Yeah, this is the end of April.
Yeah.
The weather has improved at long last in
Yeah.
the state of Michigan.
Right.
And things are looking up.
Yes, it's April is always well. It can go either way, but it's getting warmer. It's getting nice. We're finally out of leaving. Smarch is in the rearview mirror.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I'm feeling good too.
That's right. And you're sipping on a Coke Zero over there.
Courtesy of you.
I would like to point out to the listener that Jeff is a man of absolutely no principle.
What are you trying to say?
You've been telling me for years that you are only a Diet Coker.
Well, I don't.
And that somehow Diet Coke is so different than Coke Zero.
I prefer it.
And you wouldn't stoop to drink a Coke Zero.
I don't think stooping ever came into the conversation. I think you're remembering wrongly.
But as soon as I pull one out of the refrigerator, you can't drink it fast enough.
Well, I'm a large part of my makeup is I'm a Dutchman. I'm going to take a free gift.
Good. That's fair. You're a soda opportunist.
And that's exactly what I am.
There you go.
Right there. And I'm not going to apologize.
All right, you shouldn't.
Right.
But you're feeling well also?
I'm feeling well.
Okay.
I'm good. Well, I'm under that pile of blue books right now. So we're in the midst of exams at my institution, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so, yeah.
Excellent.
And I'm
some blue booking going on, right?
Booking, yeah. And I'm also prepping for a student trip to Greece.
Oh, yeah.
In about a monmonth and a half, I will be taking a hearty group of 12 over to
a baker's dozen.
A baker's dozen. It's 12 plus me.
Right.
And going to see some of the wonderful places. Yeah,
we have threatened several times, as you know, an ad nauseum Greece trip combined with hayride. Remember that?
That's right.
That's a deep cut.
That is a deep cut.
But we still have never done it.
We haven't. Right.
So what's the general itinerary? You're flying into Athens, I assume?
Yep, flying to Athens, and we're going to make our way down to the Peloponnese, and we're going to stay
Sparta?
a couple nights in Nauplia. Not getting that far south.
No.
We're going to go to Mycenae, Epidaurus, Eleusis.
Nice.
We're going to go to Olympia.
Right.
Cross the bridge up into Delphi.
Ah, the Anti-Rio Bridge.
Yep.
Lovely there.
Yep.
That channel is swimming with jellyfish.
Is it really?
Absolutely.
Have you taken a swim in there or something?
No, but I crossed, this is interesting. I crossed on a bus that was on a boat. It was cheaper to put the bus on the boat than to take the bus across the bridge.
Really?
Which is not easy to say. And as I look down into the channel, it's swimming with jellyfish.
That's really weird.
And just off to the west, remember, there's the famous battle that took place there.
Yeah.
Where the European forces defeated the Turks.
Yes, Lepanto.
That's correct.
Yep.
It's very scenic, very scenic.
Yes.
And then you're going up to Delphi, or are you gonna veer off to Dodona?
No, we're not. We're going up to Delphi, and then we're going to as far north as we get is we're going to the pass at Thermopylae.
Oh yeah.
And then coming back down towards Athens, I'm going to try to. I always try to steer the group towards a place that's new for me.
Excellent.
Selfishly, and so we're gonna try to stop at the site of the so-called Oracle of Trophonius, the cave into the Oracle of the Dead there, which I always wanted to see.
Well, remember, did we go to Ioannina?
We did.
On one of our trips?
Yes. We took the boat out to the island in the middle of that lake there.
That's a Mark Williams' favorite spot, isn't it?
It is.
And there's a university there.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And that, if memory serves, while we're just, traipsing down memory lane here, that's when we had that baklava.
That's right. They served us those giant bricks of baklava.
The year was 2011, right?
That is
and
true.
January, we checked into that lovely hotel in Ioannina, and it wasn't power outage, it was water shortage. The hotel came to us and our 36, if memory serves, or 34 students.
Yeah.
Hopefully some of them are listening and they remember this. those students, and they said, we're very sorry, but the water is going to be turned off for 48 hours.
I completely forgot about
or something
that.
like that.
Yeah.
And we were not too happy about that.
No.
That's a long time to go without water. So
Especially
they said,
with a giant lake nearby.
Exactly. And so they said, so what we're going to do as a kind of compensation is we're going to give you free dessert at the hotel.
That's right.
So they gave us a piece of baklava that, I don't know, it was the size of a standard brick that you'd use, to build a wall or something.
It was massive. I remember this being delivered and seeing some of the eyes of our students just become dinner plates.
That's correct. Yeah. And of course, the baklava or the briklava is deep soaked in honey. Mm-hmm. I had the most intense insulin headache just right up at the front of my forehead. I can't get through this.
Yeah.
But we ate the whole thing.
We did. Well,
that's what you do.
Because the rules of Xenia apply, right? You have to you have to be a good guest.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what you're doing, and you're going to the cave of Trophonius.
Trophonius, right?
Very
So
nice.
it's the criminal. It's so expensive. To take a group over. And So some of these places, I would love to extend a couple days, do Sparta, do Dodona, but you have to kind of keep it tight just to
go to an island, maybe.
We are doing one day. We're doing an island hop. We're going to go to Aegina and Hydra.
Oh, Aegina! Yep. I haven't been to Hydra, but Aegina, fantastic.
Yeah.
Rent the moped and drive around Aegina. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's the temple of Athena there, right?
Right. So I'm hoping to get. I know because they drop you off at the little village there,
right?
And it's a bit of a hike up to the temple.
Are you putting the students through some training in advance?
In terms of like physical,
getting ready for the
calisthenics?
Hike? Yeah.
I have talked to the group about you should be able to walk this many miles per day without keeling over.
Right.
But I'm hoping we have enough time in Aegina to get up because I've never seen that temple.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Take the ferry across from the Piraeus.
Yep.
Really nice.
Yes, indeed.
Well, you'll have to tell us about the trip when it is concluded, and maybe someday, if we ever follow through, we'll have the Ad Nauseam tour.
I would love to do that. Yeah.
Jeff, what are we talking about today?
This is really interesting and maybe a little bit controversial, depending on kind of what how you approach the topic.
I run toward controversy.
You do. Yes, I know you do. Exactly. Head on. And this comes from a book. I believe that the title of our episode is the title of the book, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, does the New Testament imitate Homer? 4 cases from the Acts of Apostles.
Right. So this was written by one Dennis R. MacDonald, Yale University Press, 2003. And the argument that he makes, basically, and we're going to look at it in detail. We're going to look at the first of the 4 cases, which concerns the dreams of Peter and Cornelius, and compare them to the dream of Agamemnon in Iliad Book 2.
Right.
But in very general terms, the case that MacDonald makes is that Luke, the writer of the Gospel and the Acts, using some what he describes as legendary material in the life of the early Christian community, crafts his stories self-consciously after the Homeric epics.
That's right. Yep. So I take it from his introduction. This is not Mr. MacDonald's first foray into this.
No,
right? He's written on the book of Mark or the Gospel of Mark.
That's
right?
correct,
and has argued for a similar type of influence and imitation.
That's correct.
Yep.
So if we take a look at the book, right, Part 1, Visions of Cornelius and Peter and Iliad 2. Part 2, Paul's Farewell at Miletus and Iliad Book 6. Part 3, the selection of Matthias as the apostle who replaced Judas and Iliad Book 7. I don't know how that's going to work. Part 4, Peter's escape from prison and Iliad Book 24, which of course is it 22 is Priam ransoms Hector's body?
I believe that's right.
And then Book 24 is just the conclusion. It's kind of
the funeral of Hector. Right?
Yeah, and the rolling of the credits and so forth.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. So we're going to take you through, first of all, the introduction, because in the introduction, MacDonald sets out 6 criteria for establishing his case of mimesis versus form criticism.
Yes. You want to break that down?
Yeah, along the way, we're going to have to, well, I was just still on my way here.
Gotcha.
Okay. We're going to have to break down some of these definitions and so forth, because otherwise, perhaps a lot of this is not going to make any sense.
Yeah.
Did you catch the dedication to this book?
No.
It's one of the most interesting aspects thus far of the entire thing.
Okay. What's so great about it?
Well, I just want to know, are you a read the introduction, read the acknowledgement? I'm guessing you're not. I read the
introduction, but I usually don't really care about the acknowledgements because they have nothing. They were to people that I have I don't know and
Okay.
I don't really care about. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But maybe you'll find someone in there that you know.
I guess so.
Maybe you'll be in there.
Yeah, maybe.
No?
Right.
Okay, you're looking at me skeptically.
Well, what is it about this one that you like?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the dedication is for Gordon, Win, Don, and Treehouse. Didn't you catch that?
I didn't. I didn't look at that.
The
page.
dedication is to Treehouse. And what in the world? So then, if you look through this is the first time I've ever seen this in any of the many books that I've read. Right at the end of the acknowledgments, this is page 10. He says, "I also have dedicated it to Treehouse, the home of these people, his brother-in-law and his sister, in Marin County, where I have spent many productive and memorable days hiking, reading, writing, and ruminating about Homer and the New Testament." So those things are all very interesting, aren't they? Hiking, reading, writing, ruminate. You like to ruminate?
I do like to ruminate, right?
Right.
But in Treehouse?
Well, Treehouse, some people give their homes names.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
I do know that.
Like,
I tend not to like that.
Rivendell, right? Where Elrond, the character from The Matrix, where he lived.
Right.
Remember?
Right. Exactly. And isn't C.S. Lewis's house the Kilns?
I didn't know
Isn't that right?
Because he was always firing and breaking things, or what?
I guess so. He was a mad into pottery.
Ceramicist?
I have no idea. Right.
So the Winkle home doesn't have a name?
No, now I'm thinking maybe it should. I think what I don't like about this is that I don't like the treehouse without an indicative, right? Why not the treehouse? It's just treehouse.
Treehouse. I see. No article. Yeah.
Yeah.
The home we used to live in, we refer to as Old Clemmy.
Old Clemmy?
Yeah, it was on Clements Mill. Right? Old Clemmy.
Oh yeah, I visited your house.
Yeah, you were there a few times.
I was at Old Clemmy a few times.
Now we're way off track. We are so far off track we can't even see the track.
Oh man, well let's get back on.
So, does the New Testament imitate Homer? So we got to go through the introduction because here he lays out the case.
Yes.
And listener, before Jeffrey T. Winkle and I fired up the USB audio processor and turned on the microphones, we debated, shall we do more than one episode on this?
Yeah.
What did we decide?
Oh, I think we were leaning towards yes. The question is how many.
Okay.
Right. I do think that this is a really interesting topic.
Fascinating.
Right? I mean, I will.
You're gonna tip your hand.
I'll tip my hand a little bit. That from what I've read, I haven't read through the whole book yet. I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
But I'm also kind of skeptical. But I'm also okay. Tell me more. And so I think this is a really interesting and important topic and worth going through in detail,
right?
And not just try to kind of cram it all in.
Don't you have some apprehension though, Winks, about whether we're going to start a third series when we already have Maru and Richard going?
Oh, we can. That's just we're juggling. That would be juggling three balls, right?
We can handle that.
We can handle that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My perception is that Maru is very interesting to a select Marfew, you might say. I find it really interesting.
Yeah, I do too. But I mean, what I like about this book is it's compared to Maru and to Richard. It's short.
You're right.
Yep.
You're right.
Yep.
So let's get started here, and we're going to look at the beginning of the introduction.
Yeah.
So this is going to be page 1, if I'm not mistaken. And MacDonald says, in his former work, The Homeric Epics and the Gospel of Mark, I argued that the author of the earliest gospel used the Odyssey as his primary literary model for chapters 1 through 14. He used the Iliad, especially the death of Hector and the ransom of his corpse, as his model for chapters 15 and 16. I'm gratified by many responses to the book, but it has also generated skepticism, criticism, and occasional hostility. It is to answer my critics that I have undertaken this book, which compares 4 extensive passages in the Acts of the Apostles with the Iliad.
Right. Yeah. Now, for me, just kind of when I read that first paragraph, it raised 2 questions, and
okay.
I think that in the pages that follow, he addresses them. But
he works too.
But not to my full satisfaction. But my 2 questions are from what I know about the synoptic gospel.
Right.
Mark is usually the one that's considered to be the worst stylist.
Okay.
Right.
You might say the simplest.
The simplest, right? His Greek, when you compare it to John's or to Luke's, it's not as sharp. It doesn't flow as well. Right.
No, it's very, very simple, repetitive.
And so if we were to speculate from that comparative education of them, Mark might be made it to 8th grade.
Yeah, that's typically how it's understood.
Right. And so from that, so that raises the question: how much of the Odyssey and the Iliad would Mark have been, one, familiar with, and two, would have known it well enough to model the structure of his gospel on it?
That's right.
That's the kind of the first question I would have.
Okay.
And the second one is why?
Right.
What's the point?
I think that the second question is more easily answered than the first. But so far in my journey through this book, I'm not satisfied with MacDonald's answers.
Nor am I.
But we'll get to them.
Yep.
So he says, from the outset, I knew that my reading of Mark would meet resistance not only from those who read the Gospels as historically reliable, I'm in that company and you are too, but also from critically trained scholars. Most modern treatments of the Gospels and Acts view their authors as redactors or editors of pre-existing traditions and written sources. So there are a number, right, of the Q source, for example. There are a number of suggestions about where, here, this is not MacDonald, this is me, about how it is that the authors of the four Gospels, specifically the synoptics, leaving John aside, put together what they then gave to the world.
Yes.
And this has really been a question from the beginning, but more intense in the last 200 years, especially. And several authors have noted, this is one of the reasons this book is so interesting to me, that the two most important literary questions in all of Western literature are this. Who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey? And secondly, what is the relationship between the synoptists?
Yes.
Right? Those by far have consumed more barrels of ink than any other question.
Right.
So another question, something like how original was Shakespeare? All right, this is a lot of time spent on that.
Yes.
But nowhere near as much time as these two questions.
Exactly. Right. So the so-called Homeric question.
Right.
Is this the work of a single voice?
Yes, the Unitarian hypothesis.
Or is it kind of cobbled together, kind of the quilt?
That's right.
The quilt.
The analytical Wolffian idea.
Yeah.
And so this book, in some ways, combines those two questions. But is the answer persuasive? I guess we'll have to see. Jeff, could you set up for the listener, for us a little bit, the difference between form criticism and mimesis as MacDonald presents it?
Sure. So this comes from the first paragraph on page 2 of the introduction, where he writes, no targets for imitation were more popular than the Iliad and the Odyssey, even for the writing of prose. Whereas a form critic compares a narrative in the New Testament to other tales of the same genre as a collectivity, a mimesis critic will compare it with earlier texts, one or more of which might have served the author as a model. Of course, literary imitation cannot account for all stories in Gospels and Acts, but it can account for an impressive number of them.
Okay. That's very helpful. So did you get the impression that MacDonald disbelieves in the historicity of the Gospels and Acts altogether?
Well, it's hard to tell.
Okay.
I mean, he drops these things about, some people might think this, something like that. My sense from reading this is if I had to guess, I would say yes, he dismisses the Gospels as being historically reliable and sees them more as just kind of an amalgamation of influences.
Well, there are so many different possible positions to take on this, right? There's the one position would be the idea that the Holy Spirit spoke directly in or audibly to the writers of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We'll just include him for now, and that they took down as dictation exactly what the Holy Spirit spoke to them somehow. That's one position. Another position is that they were eyewitnesses of these events, interviewed other eyewitnesses, and under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, they recorded things that they knew, but somehow divine intervention made sure that nothing erroneous was included and that the theological and moral lessons were put in the front in the way that the divinity, God wanted it to be.
Right.
A third way would be to say that all of that happened without divine intervention.
Right.
And a fourth way would be, I guess, that they just made the stories up for whatever reason to attain literary fame, to humiliate their theological opponents. I don't know. I mean, there's any number of possibilities.
Right.
And that's just 4. There's probably 3 or 4 more legitimate candidates if you're just standing back and thinking about how did this happen.
Sure. Well, I mean, you could even add to that, the theory of Q, right? This idea that there was
some source,
right? So, for our listeners who might not be familiar, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptic Gospels Because they generally follow the same narrative pattern. They share a lot of the same stories concerning Jesus and the kind of the arc of his life, death, and resurrection. And so the theory is they all must be working from a similar source.
Right.
And so I've also heard it said is that, after...
And there is, if I may interrupt,
yeah.
there's some actual biblical support for that in what Luke says at the beginning of his gospel, that, many have tried to write down what has happened. I've done my study, I've done my research, and here's what I came up with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some have taken that as, well, he's referring to maybe Matthew, or maybe he's referring to Mark.
Right, right.
And someday we can do a complete episode on this topic. We could look at, for example, this Lutheran scholar John Wenham. In 1992, he published a really, you might call it a conservative or traditional tour de force, redating Matthew, Mark, and Luke, a fresh assault on the synoptic problem. And in that, he goes and he argues for the traditional position that these are actually very, very early.
Yeah.
And they're mostly, almost completely independent of each other.
Interesting. Right. Yeah, that's really, that's counter to, I was just reading, or actually I was just listening to another, I was into an apologetics podcast. And in that came this idea is that, during the life of Jesus, the stories and the tradition of Jesus were already kind of entering into the oral culture.
Yes.
Right. And they had been, in a time where I think like powers of memory and memorization are to a degree that we can't even fathom anymore.
Yeah, that's the claim.
Right, they were embedded in the culture, and so when it came time to write them down,
right,
they were kind of already solidified
right.
as kind of as a memorized document.
Yeah, so that's kind of the theory of the logia, right? The logia are the specific aphorisms of Christ.
Yeah, the
really memorable things that he said that appear in all three of the synoptists, and there are such things in John, but they're different, right?
Yeah.
And so that there must have been some oral tradition around those, and then each of the synoptic authors filled in the narrative part from different perspectives.
Right.
It's a complicated topic.
Really, yeah.
And a fascinating one, and frankly, like the Homeric problem, absent new evidence, it'll probably never be resolved.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just too complicated.
I like that you brought up the Wenham, because I think one of the things that
MacDonald,
sorry,
yep, it's okay,
that he doesn't really address is the question of dating,
right?
Which I think is essential.
Of course, right? I think he assumes that Luke. I don't know how he assumes this, because Luke is mentioned as a historical character in Paul's epistles, right? And I don't think there's anything in Luke, as there is in Matthew, for example, that would lead skeptics to conclude it was written after the fall of Jerusalem.
Right.
So that means that, hypothesizing Luke in the early 2nd century is pretty much an impossibility.
It is an impossibility. Yeah, I think that's a ridiculous claim. So Luke is an adult within 30 years of the life of Jesus,
right?
At least, right?
Yeah.
And so that also kind of leads to the question of, okay, if these authors are populating their texts with this legendary material,
right? So-called
legendary material,
right?
That if they're doing this within the living memory of people who saw these things, that raises all kinds of issues. As opposed to Virgil,
right?
Giving a Roman version of Homer,
right?
And saying, it's a completely different use, and the stakes are so much different.
Yeah, 700 to 800 years before,
right?
Virgil is the potential earliest appearance of the Homeric text in written form.
Right.
750, 820, something like that.
And it struck me, I found MacDonald kind of lumping those kinds of things together.
Right.
Whereas, those who were, who knew Jesus on earth.
Right.
And were witness to these things or knew other traditions, that they would not have raised objections to that kind of this kind of legendizing.
Yes. But his claim isn't so much that they're making stuff up, I guess, but that the synoptic authors are specifically Luke, and then when we get to Acts, which is really our first example, they're shaping the pre-existing material, whether MacDonald believes it's true or not. They're shaping it according to Homeric conceptions.
Yes.
And I find that plausible, not fully convinced. Yeah. What about the criteria that MacDonald gives for assessing or establishing mimesis as opposed to form criticism?
Right. Now, I like this about MacDonald. If he sets this out fairly clearly, he's making what I take to be a some fairly bold claims.
Right.
But at the very least, he says, okay, these are he gives 6 fairly clear benchmarks for deciding
Right.
what's in and what's out.
I appreciate that too. I don't like impressionistic arguments. I like arguments that attempt to elucidate a series of falsifiable criteria, right?
Yes.
And then you can test them.
Yeah.
So what are some of these criteria?
Well, let me read from MacDonald himself.
Okay.
He says, I have designed 6 criteria for spotting literary imitation in ancient texts, not just of the New Testament and not just of classical poetry. I crafted the criteria to reflect the descriptions of mimetic practices in Greek and Roman authors, but they apply to all types of direct literary influence. The first 2 criteria assess the cultural significance of the proposed model. Accessibility, criterion 1, pertains to the dating of the proposed model relative to the imitation and its physical distribution and popularity in education, art, and literature.
Yeah, so if we could pause right there,
Yep.
I think easily, his argument meets criterion 1, right? The proposed model is Homer,
Yes.
relative to the imitation, its physical distribution and popularity in education, art, and literature. So the entire Mediterranean world, right, whether speaking Greek or Latin, was heavily influenced by the Homeric poems.
Yes.
Now, the potential counter argument is even Luke,
Yeah.
even in Palestine,
Right.
even a person, one of whose parents was maybe a native Aramaic speaker.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the theories of Luke. He had one Aramaic parent. He had one Greek parent.
Right.
That's why he has a Greek name. But why his Greek is not pure, you might say. He had a higher literary education than the other synoptic authors, but it's not clear that he read something like Demosthenes.
Right.
So I guess we'll have to see if MacDonald can establish that.
Yeah.
But just at a surface glance, okay, probably accessibility, the criterion is met.
Right.
You want to continue with the other criteria?
Sure. So obviously no author can imitate a text that he or she has not read. So the more widespread the circulation and popularity of the model, the stronger the case that the author used it. Less obvious, but no less important, is the accessibility of the model to the intended readers. Ancient narratives often paraded themselves out as rewritings of earlier ones to invite comparison. This strategy worked only if their readers knew the models well enough to get the point. So I guess he's still extrapolating on
The first criterion.
But I mean,
And you think about the proemium to Herodotus, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
we talked about in an episode with Ken Bratt,
that's right.
right? Where Herodotus says, look, the Trojan War was the greatest war ever. He makes a little nod to Homer, but my war, the one between the Greeks and the Persians, is probably even greater than that.
Yes.
So there's the kind of the nod to Homer with the imitation, assuming his readers will understand it.
Yes, exactly.
Are the readers of the Acts of the Apostles, are they given any kind of a nod to Homer?
Right. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I make this point in my myth classes,
Okay.
where I think one of the things that separates ancient culture from modern secular culture when it comes to narrative writing,
Right.
is we tend to prize, or we think we
Right.
tend to prize originality. Right. Give me something that I've never seen or heard before, whether that's even possible. Whereas an ancient audience would say, give me something I recognize, but do something different with it.
Right.
So the example I always use is that the audience going to see Oedipus, the king, Sophocles play for the first time, they all knew the story.
Right.
They knew kind of where it was going. And so the tension wasn't what's going to happen next. The tension is, what is this playwright doing with a story I already know. So I take that idea of an author writing out the story of the Acts of the Apostles, sprinkling in some Homer or something like that, or showing knowledge of previous traditions. That's just the way it was done.
Sure.
Yeah.
And my favorite example is the 2016 film Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I've never seen the film.
Is that an actual film?
Absolutely it
my
is.
God.
Seth Grahame-Smith, his 2009 novel of the same name, which parodies the 1813 Jane Austen novel. So that's a mashup, right?
Mashup, yes.
Yeah, you got to take something traditional and contemporize it. So I haven't seen it, not planning to see it, but it put me in mind of that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So continuing on page 3,
Yeah.
if an ancient Greek reader, says MacDonald, knew only one work of literature, it probably was the Iliad. One catalog of manuscripts from Greco-Roman Egypt lists over 600 for Homer, and most of these pertain to the Iliad. After Homer, the next best preserved authors, Demosthenes with 83, Euripides with 77, and Hesiod, this was surprising, with 72. In other words, 2 texts survive of Homer for every text by these 3 authors combined.
Right. Now, it should be mentioned that the number of copies of the New Testament dwarf all of them.
Oh, yes.
Right?
It's something like
thousands.
23,000.
Yes. Yeah.
But that just obviously proves the popularity of those works after they were written.
Yes.
It doesn't say anything. In fact, I mean, you could say that the Gospel of Matthew is the most famous work of literature of all time.
Right.
As the very first book of the New Testament by tradition. But it doesn't say anything about what Luke may have been reading. So we got to get into that potential objection. Even though here in the introduction, I think MacDonald does good work explaining just how broadly influential Homer was. It's really astounding.
Yes. So shall I want me to keep reading there?
Let's go down near the bottom of that page.
Okay.
Any claim that an author, you see that paragraph?
Yep. Any claim that an author in the 1st century CE imitated the epics thus would satisfy the first criterion, accessibility. My critics concede the point, though with a caveat. The qualification usually goes like this. Even though the Homeric epics were ubiquitous in the Greco-Roman world, they were not common in the circles that produced the New Testament.
Okay, so that's it for me, right?
Yeah.
Prior to opening up this book, this would have been my standard answer. I would have said, yes, Homer was everywhere in Greek culture, in Roman culture, but only for the educated few. That would have been the literate few. That would have been my general impression.
Right.
And I would not ever have imagined it applied to people living in Palestine.
Yes.
Now, I have made that argument before publicly for Paul.
Yes.
Because Paul was raised in Tarsus, which was known to be a Stoic university town, right? It was a center of Stoic research, a big university in Tarsus. And I think we mentioned before in Romans 2, when Paul talks about the law being written on the hearts of Gentiles, I'm sure he's talking about Sophocles and Homer and Demosthenes, because obviously he can't be talking about Confucian philosophy,
right?
Which also shows natural law.
Yes.
But not the kind of natural law that Paul could possibly have known about.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But I never would have said it about Palestine.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Exactly. And I would even say, like, even things like in Paul's letters where he states, I write this in my own hand.
Right.
And so I have no doubt that Paul knew Greek, knew how to write Greek.
Oh, yeah, very well.
Greek. And, you know, even in the Acts where he's in Athens, he shows he knows the poets, right?
Yes.
He's quoting. And
and he may even, I think it's Polybius. I think it's either Polybius or Plutarch. If it's Plutarch, then my point just fails utterly. But if it's Polybius, it stands, where the Athenians are described as deisidaimonios, very respectful of deity.
Yeah.
Which some translators take as superstitious. Or Paul says to the Athenians, I know that you are very, was it superstitious or reverent to all kinds of gods? That's a word that occurs either in Plutarch, who, post-dates Paul,
right,
or Polybius, who antedates him.
Yeah.
But it makes your point.
Yeah, no, it's and so one of the things I always wondered about. So even when we're reading a letter like First Peter,
right,
is Peter working with a scribe?
Right.
Highly
likely.
Right. So because I had the same kind of assumptions of you, is that so what kind if someone from having an Orthodox Jewish upbringing,
right,
having an Orthodox Jewish education, would Homer have been in the curriculum?
Yeah. Well,
I highly doubt it.
Well, I know, but MacDonald's going to try to answer that in just a moment.
All right.
So here you go, Winkle.
All right.
He says, when Mark, for example, alluded to other texts, they were Jewish, and he often identified them as such by introductory formulae, e.g., as it is written, hosgegraptai, or other markers. The cultural world of the earliest gospel was Jewish, not Greek.
Okay.
Says MacDonald, this objection fails on 3 counts.
Okay, let's have it.
All right. First, Jews were by no means immune to Homeric influence. If someone learned to read Greek in school, he or she would have been exposed to the epics.
If only maybe Maru will
tell us
address this. I don't know if he goes down that path. But yeah.
Long before Mark, Hellenistic Jewish poets imitated Homer to prosify biblical themes. The historian Artopanus imitated the Iliad to narrate a story about Moses. Did not know that. And the book of Tobit, probably composed in Aramaic, almost certainly imitated the first 4 books of the Odyssey. The historian Josephus frequently imitated Homer when narrating Jewish themes. Okay. To say that someone was Jewish says nothing whatever about his or her knowledge of Homer.
And that still is...
Convinced?
No, I'm not convinced.
Okay.
I need to know... when you say Hellenistic Jews,
What, you want a photograph?
I do want to. Well, I want to know. We need to locate these people.
Okay.
Are we talking about Palestinian Jews? Are we talking about Jews in Alexandria?
Jews living in Athens.
Right. Exactly.
Philo, right, in Alexandria.
Right.
Clearly.
It's a different ballgame.
You're right.
Yeah.
Clearly, Philo Judaeus, as he's called, right, had read and knew his Homer and the entire Greek corpus. Mark?
Where's Josephus from?
Josephus is from Palestine.
He's okay. Okay, well,
and he was in the entourage of the Flavians, right?
Okay, all right, yeah. Okay, well,
Titus.
that's more convincing, I suppose. But I don't know.
I'm still not fully convinced.
Yeah.
In part because we know almost nothing about John Mark, right?
Right.
Whose name is not even mentioned as the author of the gospel.
Right.
But the tradition that I think is very reliable is that it was written to the church at Rome, and it was likely written at Peter's dictation. So,
Right.
So Peter is the eyewitness behind the Gospel of Mark. I take that to be quite established. But we don't know that these men learned Greek in school.
Right.
Which is what MacDonald, I think, assumes. Luke, we're told by Paul, was a physician.
Right.
So if that's true, which I have every reason to believe it is, then he would have had education, presumably literary education.
Yeah.
But we know nothing about Mark's education.
My assumption always is that even in Palestine, particularly when it falls into becomes a Roman province, that Koine Greek was you had to know it to do business on the street.
You had to know how to speak it.
You had to know how to speak it. But
You didn't have to know how to write it.
Right, write it or read it.
But
right?
we do have the written texts of the Gospels, so maybe this is complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe the issue here is that MacDonald thinks that they're working based on oral tradition, but his argument in part assumes that they were literary authors.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps there's some room there for inconsistency.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on to the second objection.
Yes. Second, in all likelihood, neither the author of Mark nor his intended readers were ethnic Jews, for he had to translate simple Aramaic words and basic Jewish practices for this audience, and did not always do so accurately. One can account for the Jewish concerns in the gospel from memories of Jesus' Galilean environment and familiarity with biblical texts. All right,
I accept that.
Okay.
That seems obvious. That seems to me one of his best claims.
Yep. And then the third objection, it was the third, even though I agree wholeheartedly that the Gospels and Acts display enormous debts to Jewish literature and culture, such debts do not exclude other influences. Indeed, a common practice in ancient mimesis was the use of multiple literary models in intertextual eclecticism. Mark and Luke, I submit, borrowed from both the Jewish Bible and the Greek epic.
So there's the main claim, right?
Yeah.
Mark and Luke borrowed from both the Jewish Bible and the Greek epic. So just to take your temperature, Winkle.
Yeah.
You're a longtime student of both the scriptures and the classical world. Would you have accepted that particular claim prior to opening up this book?
That he borrowed from both the Jewish Bible and the
yes,
Greek.
that Mark and Luke borrowed from both the Jewish Bible and Greek epic.
Yeah, broadly speaking, I'm open to that. That doesn't strike me as on its face false.
Right. So surely it struck you before in reading the Acts of the Apostles that the latter, 2/3 of the book is Paul's amazing sea journey.
Yeah.
Very Odyssean.
Right.
He makes this amazing sea journey, and the goal is to land him in Italy to appear before Caesar.
Right.
Which doesn't really happen when the book concludes.
Right.
In chapter 28, he's there with openness unhindered, I think it says in the text, in Caesar's household under house arrest.
Yep.
But we don't know what actually happened.
That's where the narrative ends.
It's the ultimate cliffhanger.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think part of the problem, or part of the things that I wrestled to is, and I think MacDonald the answers around it is this problem of genre.
Okay.
Right? And so you have to kind of fit the Gospels, fit Luke Acts into a particular box, and say,
right.
Okay, now I've kind of identified what the genre is, and then you can kind of go back through it and say,
yes.
This is how it's put together.
And it's prose, right?
It's prose, right? And so I look at the Gospels is, okay, so what is it? This is biography?
Yes.
Right?
It's sui generis. These are brand new.
Right.
The Gospels are a brand new genre.
That's exactly, and I think that's one of the problems that MacDonald's has. I think he so wants it to kind of fit into a recognized classical genre because now we can kind of play by, what rules does that come with?
Right.
Right. And I don't know how useful that is.
Well, this is where I am right now. The basic claim of a general Homeric influence on Greek writers of the New Testament?
Yeah.
Sure. But the specifics remains to be seen.
Right, exactly. All right, Dave, we got to get through some of these, the rest of these 6
Yes.
criteria. We've only taken care of one. Will you
Sure.
hurry us along?
Right. Okay. So analogy, says MacDonald in the introduction, is the second criterion. Analogy asks if other ancient authors imitated the same proposed model. Now, that's a slam dunk, right? Everybody imitated Homer.
Right.
And he says, I will argue that the Acts of the Apostles imitates 4 famous passages from the Iliad that also informed imitations in the Odyssey, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Aristophanes. Long, long list.
Yes.
Then there are critics of that approach. We'll leave that aside for now. And then the third criterion, right, is that of density.
Density.
The criteria, this is one I can relate to. The criterion of density assesses the number of volume of similarities between the two works. The more parallels one can identify, the more convincing is the case for imitation. That seems very reasonable, doesn't it?
Seems almost mathematical.
Yes.
Right?
If you get one reference, okay, it could be chance. But if you get 12
Yeah.
and they're clearly connections, what are the odds of that happening?
Right.
The fourth criterion examines the relative sequencing of motifs in the two works. If parallels appear in the same order, says MacDonald, the case strengthens for imitation. Conversely, if the parallels are random, the case is less compelling. 3 of the 4 texts that I compare with the Iliad are narratives, and in each case the two works not only share several parallels, they do so in impressively similar, there's a wiggle word, right?
Yes.
Impressively similar sequences.
Yes. Not exact.
No,
Right.
but similar. Well, I don't know. Is that a high enough bar?
We'll see.
So we have a couple of criteria left, right? Namely, actually we have one more left, and that is distinctive traits. So says MacDonald on page 6 of the introduction, these last 3 criteria, density, order, and distinctive traits, provide the glue for holding the model and the imitation together hermeneutically. The 6th and final criterion assesses the strategic differences between the two texts, interpretability. As often as not, ancient authors borrowed from their models to rival them, whether in style, philosophical adequacy, persuasiveness, religious perspective, or whatever. Now, Jeff, here I think is where MacDonald starts to get really, really interesting.
Okay.
And that is, he suggests that Luke had in mind, as he's writing the Acts of the Apostles, he has in mind the Homeric poems, and he attempts to one-up them by recasting the basic structure of parts of the Iliad, but recasting Christ as a unique kind of epic hero.
Yes.
In a way that his audience could relate to and would recognize that he was doing something that was intended to be grander or more conclusive.
Sure. Now, I don't think MacDonald addresses this, but I've heard similar kinds of things. That if you look at the way that the life of Christ is structured in the Gospels, it adheres very much to a kind of a Joseph Campbellian hero's journey. You have a miraculous birth story. You have one story about Jesus as a kid, and then fast forward. I think it's Luke who tells us that in his 30th year, he begins his he's baptized and begins his mission. And so, those questions that you'll often hear people speculate: what did Jesus do between ages 12 and 30? One of the ways you could answer that is that these authors are considering their audience.
Right.
They know how a hero story is supposed to unfold.
Right. And
so,
they're not that interested
exactly
in things that don't have to do with the precise mission.
Right.
They're interested in the basic origin. Where did this person come from?
Right.
But until they get engaged in the mission, the rest is not that interesting.
It's not that interesting, right?
In the way that it is to a modern audience.
Exactly, right. And so it's
for whatever reason.
And you're kind of meeting expectations.
Yeah.
But I also like what you were saying from MacDonald, but also the idea is that I'm telling you a hero story, but this is the hero story of all hero stories.
Correct.
It's the culmination of all hero stories, and so you're kind of using something familiar, but you are also the subject matter is so much more grand.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Jeff, before we get to the break, which is
Yes.
going to be about 3 or 4 hours from now, from what I can tell, we have to deal with the material on page 7 of the introduction, specifically this individual, Marianne Palmer Bonds,
Okay.
who is one of MacDonald's foils, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
Could you start reading in the paragraph that says, if any author of the New Testament?
Yes. If any author of the New Testament was capable of imitating Homeric epic, it was the author of Luke Acts. He quotes Herodotus' Phenomena in Acts 17:28 and Euripides' Bacchae in 26:14. and his vocabulary, style, and compositional techniques display an impressive level of literary education. So I'm taking his word for it that those are kind of established allusions.
Definitely. I don't think there's any doubt. Okay. But in the same way that people can quote Shakespeare and have no idea where it came from, it's possible, it could not likely, that it's so much in the air that Luke, right, is quoting Euripides and Aratus's phenomena, but never read them directly.
Exactly, in the way that you hear people use the phrase "one fell swoop" and not know that it comes from Shakespeare.
Oh yeah,
right.
Of course, these are the dog days. Shakespeare,
right?
Almost every good expression in English comes from Shakespeare, but how many people have actually read him? Right. It's not that high.
Yeah. So the argument that like Homer was just simply it's so much in the water,
right?
That doesn't require a literary education.
No, it doesn't. Okay. However, as we've already said, Luke, as a physician, no doubt had a literary education prior to his medical education.
Indeed. Well, let me continue here.
Yes.
Let's see here. Yes, the same year that I published my book on Mark, Marianne Palmer Bonds published The Past as Legacy, Luke Acts, an Ancient Epic, in which she argues that Luke Acts is neither a history nor a historical novel, but a prose epic modeled after not the Iliad, but Virgil's Aeneid.
Okay, now that just set me back, because I'm thinking, come on, MacDonald, I'm only on page 7 of the introduction, and you're going to try to convince me that Luke was imitating Homer, and now I have to deal with this new evidence from Professor Bonds that Luke was imitating the Aeneid, and I had to do a little bit of arithmetic, and I'm thinking, right, so Virgil died in 19.
Yes.
Right, and Christ died in 33 and rose again 33, maybe as early as 29, depending on how the dating goes.
Right.
So if Luke is writing in 30 years later, which seems to me like the outer limits, 60 to 70 AD.
Yeah,
it's been what 100 years? Not even 100 years since Virgil. Is it possible he's imitating Virgil?
Yeah.
I was really struck by that.
Yeah, I think some of these unanswerable questions is that clearly Virgil becomes very influential and widespread, but to how quickly and how embedded was it in the culture in a way that Homer was, I don't know.
But there's a money quote at the bottom of page 7, and this is from Professor Bonds. So MacDonald, this is just the nature of academic study. MacDonald is quoting another author here, and now I'm quoting him.
Yep.
Says Bonds, Luke's use of supernatural beings as a narrative device employed at critical junctures to shape the direction and further movement of the plot finds its closest parallel in Greek and Roman epic. Originally introduced by Homer, supernatural interaction with the central characters of the narrative remained a signature characteristic of the epic genre. What do you think?
It's still pretty broad to me.
Well, even as I was reading these words, I was thinking, no, wait a minute, the Old Testament is filled with that.
Exactly.
When Jacob wrestles with the angel, right? When he has his dream of the ladder, when Isaiah has his vision in chapter 6, when Joshua meets the commander of the armies of the Lord early in. So it's not, obviously it's throughout Greco-Roman epic, but it's not limited to that.
No, and to be fair, MacDonald, when he says the influence of the Jewish scriptures as well as the Greek epic, maybe he's having it both ways. He does talk about, I think he draws a parallel between when Elisha prays to God and the young girl is brought back from the dead, and compares that or sees a direct parallel with Jesus raising the young girl. He's saying, well, there's a conscious parallelism between the Jewish scripture and this passage. So, but I think it was
persuasive as a way to tell the story.
But to say, only in epic you find gods and goddesses showing up at opportune times. I mean, folktale, fairy tale, low culture, high culture, drama, comedy. It seems like a thin thing a weak hook to hang things on.
Okay. What about Bonds' claim in the middle of page 8? I found this also quite compelling. Can you read that to us?
The offset quote there?
That's right.
Yeah. Bonds writes, Luke Acts presents a rival vision of empire vis-a-vis the kingdom of God, with a rival deity issuing an alternative plan for universal human salvation. Furthermore, Luke Acts names a very different sort of hero as the primary instrument for the implementation of that plan, a different concept of the chosen people, and a very different means by which the conquest leads to inevitable victory. The divine plan ultimately calls for the eternal reign of the risen Jesus over a universally chosen community of believers.
Now, that really resonated in terms of whether, I guess Bonds' claim is that Luke deliberately wrote an anti-Aeneid in which Christ is the hero, but whether he did that deliberately or not, it resonates with me that the Gospel of Luke and the companion, the Acts of the Apostles, is an answer to Greco-Roman hopes and dreams that are vested in an epic like the Aeneid.
Yeah.
That part is persuasive.
Yeah.
Although MacDonald will then say, no, really what Luke is doing in his Gospel and in the Acts is imitating the same person that Virgil is imitating. It's all Homer.
Yeah, right.
Is that what you got?
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I mean, what also resonates with me is this kind of idea of the gospel writers, the writer Luke. They tell these stories as a kind of a culmination of all of these things.
Right.
So it reminds me of arguments that I've had with students or professors talking about. Well, you have the death and resurrection of Jesus, but look, Dionysus does that. Persephone does that.
Yeah, syncretism.
Right. And so this idea that it's just another one of the same, whereas I think, as a believer,
right.
I mean, you can't make this argument as kind of a secular humanitarian, but to say that, or kind of the notion of common grace, that these stories are kind of pointing towards
right.
Christ, that those other stories are evidence of creation longing for that,
right?
And then Jesus does that in the flesh,
right?
So could we see this in the same way that maybe these authors are using consciously or unconsciously these ancient motifs, but they're saying this is the culmination. All of these things are pointing towards this.
Sure, and Bond says that Luke is doing it consciously.
Yes,
with the Aeneid, and MacDonald says that Luke is doing it consciously with the Homeric epics.
Right.
At this point in the argument, I'm inclined to think that Luke is not thinking through the epics as his deliberate model, but more just picking it up from the surrounding culture.
Right.
But I guess it remains to be seen.
It remains to be seen. Yeah. I think as we've gone along in this episode, I realized that I think I'm coming down a little bit too harshly with my own conclusions already.
Yeah.
But having just said that, I'm going to come down with another conclusion. Right?
Yes.
So, I mean, he sets this up. Well, I see 4 distinct passages of a very long work that quote the Iliad, and so, well, that's wonderful. But if you're trying to make the argument that these Homeric allusions are kind of shaping the whole narrative, I need more than just 4 little chunks.
Okay,
right,
all right.
And so,
speaking, Jeff,
yes, of
4 little chunks at minute 52.
Oh my goodness!
Guess what?
It's time for the ads.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Della Chelpka, and if you are interested in adding some beauty to your home, you're ready for art that truly speaks to your story, then meet Della, a Tucson-based oil painter who captures the people, places, and moments you cherish with breathtaking detail. Della has showcased her work in multiple galleries, illustrated books, and is often commissioned for standout projects. You can find her current works for sale at her website, Della Chelpka Art. Jeff, can you spell Della Chelpka?
Yes, DELLACHELPKA.art.
.art. Yep. I don't know if I have ever visited a .art website.
Yes.
Until I went to Della's.
No, I didn't know it was a thing.
Oh, it's fantastic. The stuff she does is gorgeous. It's beautiful.
It's really cool. So I was in our last episode. We had that brief interview with her.
Yeah.
And so we had her on screen, and she was showing some of her art that she's done. It's phenomenal.
It's incredible.
It's so cool.
So find your inspiration. Visit dellachelpka.art. And if you use this coupon code, which is Apelles, Jeff, now who is Apelles?
A famous ancient artist.
That's right.
Perhaps the most famous.
That's right.
Yep.
APELLES. Use that coupon code and you will receive an Ad Nauseam discount of
10% off.
Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by Hackett Publishing. I love these guys, David. I know you love these guys. So Hackett Publishing, they've been around as long as I have.
That's right.
54 years.
And neither of you are really showing your age, let me say.
Well, thank you very much. But these guys have been keeping the flame alive for a long time now. Their offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Indianapolis, Indiana, they thread that needle. They have texts that are erudite, well done, well written, high quality, multiple translations of ancient works.
Ovid, Homer, Plato, Aristotle, you name it.
If you're a listener to the podcast, you know that we use their texts on air all the time.
Stanley Lombardo.
And you also know that both Dave and I have them on our shelves. And so what I love about Hackett is that they have high quality translations, they have attractive, really intriguing art, and very affordable. And that's a really hard thing to find.
Absolutely.
These days. Yep.
So listener, if you want to get some of that great stuff, go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT publishing.com. Check through their catalog, and you're going to want to enter this coupon code at checkout.
That is AN2025.
And that will get you 20% off your entire order. It will get you free shipping,
Yes.
and it will support this humble podcast.
So check it out.
This episode is also brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee. Our friend Mark Helweg, the wonderful entrepreneur, has been bringing fine coffee products to the masses for a little more than a decade.
Yeah.
Jeff, I know you're a great fan of the Ratio 8.
Yes.
Do you have some this morning?
Yep, that's the mothership.
Okay.
Yep, I get it ready to go, and so all I have to do in the morning is press the button, and that beautiful thing does the rest.
It's one-touch magic. You go from, what is it, bloom?
The bloom cycle, which
That's right.
off-gasses all the obnoxious
that CO2.
CO2,
Put
yeah.
it right into the biosphere. Then you have
The brew cycle.
the brew, and then you are...
You're ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I have the ratio 4. I'm really a 4 guy now, and I had 2 pots yesterday.
2 pots,
A
yep.
delicious one in the morning. I got back from some teaching, and I thought, I need another cup of coffee.
Indeed.
And so I brewed up just a half batch because you got that nice little acrylic container that you can pop out of its base.
It's my favorite feature
exactly.
of the
Fill it
4.
up with some filtered water,
Yep.
put it back there, grind up your beans. You're ready to go. A delicious cup of coffee, no
Yes.
doubt.
Yeah. So for listeners, again, if you're coming back to the podcast, you might have, I've heard this before. The ratio 8, the ratio 6 are a little bit too rich for my blood.
Yeah, they're out of my range.
Yes. The 4 is a recent addition to the family, and it's a much more affordable machine.
Yep.
It fits perfectly on your desk. It'd be great if you work in an office to have it right there.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
you want to go to ratiocoffee.com/adnauseum, ratiocoffee.com/adnauseum, and enter this coupon code at checkout. Jeff, what is that?
That is, I believe it's also AN2025, right?
No, it is not.
It's
You're
not.
close.
I'm
It's
close.
AN ratio.
AN ratio, sorry.
ANRATIO 2025,
There
and that
it
will
is.
get you $20 off any ratio machine at checkout. All right, Jeff. Well, as we get back into it, we're about to get out of it, aren't we?
We are. I knew this. This always happens. Dave,
What?
right?
What?
So I had visions like, okay, we can maybe we can make this a 2-parter. And
Yeah.
we'll get a ways into the book and get into some of MacDonald's specific examples, but we're not there yet.
No, because the introduction has just proved so riveting.
It is.
So fascinating. All the issues laid out are so interesting.
Yep. Yeah, but let's talk a little bit about
Okay.
where the text goes and what we're going to
Yes.
be talking about next week.
Okay, so the first of the 4 cases that MacDonald is going to deal with to try to establish, right, that Luke is deliberately patterning his gospel and especially Acts after the Iliad. The first is the visions of Cornelius and Peter.
Yes.
So the Cornelius, the Roman centurion of the Italian cohort, and of course Peter the apostle, how they compare to the dream of Agamemnon in Iliad Book 2.
Yes.
That's the starting point.
Yep, I'm really looking forward to that because I think that's where I'm hoping. I mean, I read a little bit about this, but I need to read it more carefully. I'm really kind of hoping he gets into the philological nitty gritty because that's where I will be convinced.
Okay, so
Yes.
if he can deliver on a word by word, point by
Yes.
point. Now, in this chapter, though, the first chapter, it actually takes 4 chapters to develop the theme altogether, but he's got a lot of columns, right?
Yep.
In which he lines up the text. I'm looking at page 46, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We'll cover this in more detail next episode. Appearance of the messenger.
Yep.
He says, compare the following. Iliad Book 2 versus Acts chapter 10, verses 3 and 4. Quickly he, oneros, meaning dream, arrived at the swift ships of the Achaeans and went to Atreides Agamemnon.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the Acts column on the right side, about the 9th hour of the day, he clearly saw in a vision an angel ungalon of God coming to him.
This is Cornelius, right?
Yes. So this is intended by MacDonald to show that Luke is deliberately imitating Iliad Book 2.
Okay. All right.
How do you feel about it at this point?
Again, I am skeptical, but also with a helping of tell me more.
Okay, so your color you skeptical.
Yes.
But a helping of tell you more.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I want to know more. Yep.
Okay, all right.
But
well, I think we should save it for next week, should we not?
We should.
This one has come to a sudden end.
And not only that, because did you hear that banging outside the door?
Oh, yes, that's right.
Exactly.
They're pounding to get in here. Who is that?
This is the T.S. Eliot Appreciation Society.
Are you talking about the TSEAS?
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
How did they find us?
Well, you know what they're upset about? You know
No.
what? Well, T.S. Eliot, his famous poem, The Wastelands.
Oh, yes.
I believe it begins with April, which we're in right now, is the cruelest month.
Really?
Right.
Well, Eliot's just wrong about that.
Well, because
the cruelest month
is March.
Of course.
Right. So they're upset about the
They're
whole
up in
March
arms,
thing.
huh?
Right. And so they want to come in. And so
There's like a quartet of them out there banging and trying to get in.
So we got to take the secret exit out of here before they get.
Don't want to fall afoul of the TSEAS.
Indeed. So, but before we get out of here, Dave, you can teach people how to read Greek. You can teach people how to read Latin. How should they go about doing that?
I think these are two of the things that, of all the things I do poorly, these are not of them.
Right.
In fact, I think I do them pretty well, by God's grace. So if you want to study some Latin, you want to study some Greek, just recently I had a student from near Sao Paulo, Brazil, sign up for my Cicero De Natura Deorum, Session 1, one of my pre-recorded classes.
Yeah.
You get 10 hours of instruction where I am teaching a classroom via Zoom, a classroom of students, how to read Cicero's beautiful, beautiful Latin prose. And for only $85, you can follow along and have all the satisfaction of the instruction without the pressure of being on the spot.
Nice.
So there's no prep, right? So go to latinperdiem.com and check out my Latin courses. We have master classes in Cicero, Erasmus, John Calvin, Theodore Beza, and we also have a number of Greek courses.
Yeah.
And these are my Moss modules.
Yes.
And guess what, Jeff?
What?
Just this past Friday, when we were meeting for our Moss classes, guess what one of the students said to me?
What did they say?
Where's Jeff?
What? Are you kidding
Said,
me?
when is he going to show up for the office hours?
I should moss bomb.
You should moss bomb something, right? A rolling Jeff gathers no moss, I like to say. So if you want to learn Greek, and I think the sweet spot for me is those who have either studied a little bit of Greek in seminary or somewhere else, but they don't have any confidence. Well, I can give you a lot of confidence through my precise and laser-focused kind of instruction. You're going to come out of there strong and ready to hike the island of Aegina if you study Greek with me. There's little doubt of that.
Fantastic. That website one more time.
latinperdiem.com. Now, Jeff, we got some people to thank.
Yes, we do. Mishka, as always, she's been with us pretty much from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Just like Hackett, right? And so
that's right.
So she's the
hired her to do some other things, and then I said, "Hey, Mishka, can you edit a podcast at expert level?" And she said, "Sure,
let's do it."
That's right.
So if whatever success this podcast has, a lot of it is
definitely
comes from Mishka, and this relatively new music that we got.
That's right.
Mr. Jeff Sheets.
Mr. Jeff Sheets, Kansas City guitarist extraordinaire, giving us this beautiful intro and outro music, Thrill Seeker.
Yeah.
And what is the thrill? It's studying the classics.
Of course.
So thank you, Jeff. You want to check out some of his work, go to jeffsheets.com, SCHEETZ, and you can find his music on Spotify. You can find it on Apple, iTunes, other kinds of digital media consumption outlets.
Indeed. Thanks also to Ken Tamplin, who's also been with us for a long time.
That's right.
And that's his music that you hear as the bumpers.
Yes, for the ads. So, Jeff, if they want to leave a review, they want to pick up a T-shirt or a hat that shows that they are taking in the classics
and keeping them down,
go to adnauseum.com, get a lovely Quae Nocent Docent Erasmian tagged shirt with an image of Hercules holding up the world or fighting the Nemean lion, and let the people know how you feel about the classics.
Indeed. Don't hesitate to write to us. You can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget that V.
Yeah, someone, Jeff, is kind of harassing me somewhere, saying you won't reply to him.
Oh, really?
Someone on YouTube, I think.
Oh, is that right?
People are always telling me, don't engage. Don't engage with it. But I can't help it. I'm always engaging.
Yes, exactly. So someone's getting after me for...
okay. Jeff, where are you?
All right.
So you got to hit him back, they say.
I will do that, yeah.
Send an email to jeff@adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V. Or if you want to get in touch with Dave, what should did you do?
Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget that. V.
And next week, Jeff, we're coming back.
We're coming back. We're going to dig more into this book and look at some of these specific would-be or possible parallels.
That's right. Between Iliad Book 2 and what Luke writes in his Acts of the Apostles.
That's right.
And Dr. Winkle,
yes.
as we bring it home, as the dogs of war come home to roost,
yes.
you have the gustatory parting shot, do you not?
I do. This comes from one Stuart Stafford, who writes, Stafford's law of dining out states that the second you finish ordering something in a restaurant, food will immediately arrive at an adjacent table that looks 10 times better. Been there.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you.